The cemetery was quieter than it should have been on a Tuesday morning. I stood there staring at the tiny white casket that held my 3-month-old daughter Ava. The flowers were beautiful, pink roses and baby's breath just like I'd imagined for her first birthday party that would never come. But something was wrong with this picture. Something that made my chest feel hollow. Where were my parents? I pulled out my phone with shaking hands, and there it was. My brother Caleb's Instagram story from just 20 minutes ago. Champagne glasses clinking, laughter echoing from a downtown rooftop. My mother's face bright and animated, toasting my brother's promotion to senior partner, while I buried their granddaughter. You see, 3 days earlier, when I called to remind them about the funeral, my mother's exact words were, "Honey, we already committed to Caleb's celebration. He worked so hard for this promotion. Surely you understand that some things are just more important right now. More important than Ava." I watched the video again. There was my father, the man who taught me to ride a bike, now laughing at some joke while his granddaughter lay in a casket 50 miles away. There was my mother, who used to read me bedtime stories, now dancing to music while I prepared to say goodbye to my baby forever. The funeral director touched my shoulder gently. "Mrs. Williams, it's time." I looked around one more time. My husband Liam's family filled the small chapel. Our neighbors, people who barely knew Ava, had taken time off work to be here. My college roommate Tina flew in from Seattle, but the two people who should have been in the front row were clinking glasses on a rooftop celebrating something they deemed more worthy of their time. As I walked toward that tiny casket, one question burned in my mind. A question that would change everything between us forever. Would you forgive someone who called your child's funeral less important? Because I honestly don't know if I can. But here's the thing. This wasn't the first time my parents chose Caleb over me. It was just the most devastating. Growing up, I was what you'd call the easy child. I didn't throw tantrums. I did my homework without being asked, and I never got in trouble at school. My brother Caleb, he was the golden boy, the one with big dreams, big personality, and apparently big priority in my parents' hearts. I remember my 13th birthday like it was yesterday. I'd been dropping hints for weeks about wanting a small party. Nothing fancy, just maybe pizza with a few friends. That morning, I woke up excited, thinking today would finally be about me. Instead, I found my parents in the kitchen frantically making phone calls. "What's happening?" I asked, still in my pajamas. "Oh, honey," my mother said, barely looking up from her planner. "Caleb got accepted to that summer leadership program at Northwestern. We need to throw him a celebration dinner tonight. All the relatives are coming." My father nodded enthusiastically. "This is huge for his college applications. We're so proud." I stood there for a moment, waiting for someone to remember. Waiting for a, "But first, happy birthday, Jenna," or "We'll celebrate you tomorrow." Nothing. "It's my birthday," I finally whispered. My mother paused, pen halfway to paper. "Oh, oh, sweetheart, of course it is. We'll do something special for you next weekend, okay? Today is just too important for Caleb's future." Next weekend never came. There was always something more important for Caleb's future. That night, I sat in my room while 30 relatives celebrated my brother downstairs. The smell of my favorite lasagna drifted up, the dinner my mother had planned for my birthday, now repurposed for Caleb's achievement. But you know what hurt the most? When my aunt asked where I was, I heard my mother say, "Oh, Jenna's fine. She's so independent. She doesn't need all this fuss. She's not like Caleb. She doesn't need the attention to thrive." I wasn't independent by choice. I was independent by necessity. This pattern continued through high school. When I made honor roll, it was expected. When Caleb made varsity football, it was a neighborhood celebration. When I got into a good college, they said, "Nice job." When Caleb got into the same college, they threw a graduation party and invited everyone we knew. The only person who ever saw how wrong this was my roommate in college, Tina. She was the first person to witness my family dynamics firsthand. It was parents' weekend freshman year. Tina's parents had driven 8 hours from Michigan to see her. They brought homemade cookies, asked about her classes, and took a million photos together. My parents showed up 2 hours late because they'd stopped to help Caleb move into his apartment first. He was a senior then. They stayed for exactly 1 hour, spent most of it talking about Caleb's internship prospects, and left early because they had dinner plans with him. After they left, Tina just stared at me. "That's not normal, Jenna," she said quietly. "What do you mean, the way they treat you? Like you're not even their priority." "That's not how parents should act." I laughed it off then. "They're just proud of Caleb. He's achieving big things." "And you're not," Tina's voice got sharper. "You're pre-med, you volunteer at the hospital, you tutor kids for free, but they barely asked about any of that." That conversation planted a seed I wasn't ready to acknowledge yet. For years, I told myself that some kids just need more attention than others, that I was lucky to be self-sufficient, that love didn't always look the same for everyone. But deep down, that seed kept growing. And every time my parents missed something important, my college graduation because Caleb had a job interview, my engagement party, because Caleb was closing on his first house, my baby shower, because Caleb was launching his own firm, that seed grew stronger. Until the day I realized I wasn't asking for special treatment. I was just asking to matter. And now, standing in this cemetery, watching my parents celebrate my brother's promotion, while I buried my daughter, I finally understood what Tina had tried to tell me all those years ago. This wasn't normal, this wasn't love, and I wasn't going to pretend it was anymore. When I found out I was pregnant, I thought maybe, just maybe, this would be the thing that finally made me important to my parents. A grandchild, their first grandchild. Surely this would change everything. I called them on a Sunday morning, my hands shaking as I held the positive pregnancy test. "Mom, I have incredible news," I said, unable to contain my excitement. "I'm pregnant. You're going to be a grandmother." There was a pause. Then, "Oh, that's wonderful, honey. How far along are you?" 8 weeks. We just confirmed it with the doctor yesterday." "Well, congratulations. Your father and I are very happy for you." But before I could even respond, she continued. "Oh, speaking of exciting news, did you hear about Caleb? His firm just landed the Morrison account. It's a $12 million deal. We're taking him to that new steakhouse downtown tonight to celebrate. He's really making a name for himself in the corporate world." And just like that, my pregnancy announcement became a footnote to my brother's business success. Throughout my pregnancy, it was more of the same. When I called to share that we were having a girl, my mother interrupted halfway through to tell me about Caleb's promotion to junior partner. When I sent ultrasound photos, I got a brief, cute text back, followed by a screenshot of Caleb's new BMW. But you know what? I had something they didn't give me. My husband Liam's family. From the moment we announced the pregnancy, Liam's parents treated me like I was carrying precious cargo. His mother, Carol, called me every week to check on how I was feeling. His father, Mike, spent weekends building a crib from scratch because he wanted his granddaughter to have something made with love. They threw me a baby shower that my parents almost missed because Caleb had a golf tournament the same day. When my parents finally showed up, 30 minutes before it ended, they handed me a generic gift bag from Target and spent the rest of the time on their phones, texting updates about Caleb's golf score to the family group chat. But the day Ava was born, that day, I forgot about all of it. March 15th, 3:17 a.m. After 18 hours of labor, she finally arrived. 7 pounds, 2 ounces of absolute perfection. When the doctor placed her on my chest, still covered in vernix, and screaming her tiny lungs out, I felt something I'd never experienced before. Unconditional love. Pure, overwhelming, fierce love. I looked at her perfect little fingers, her button nose, the way she immediately stopped crying when she heard my voice. This tiny person was mine. She would never have to wonder if she mattered. She would never have to compete for my attention. She would know every single day that she was my priority. "She's beautiful," Liam whispered, tears streaming down his face as he touched her tiny hand. Within hours, Carol and Mike were there with flowers, balloons, and homemade lasagna for when we got home. They held Ava like she was made of glass, took 100 photos, and Carol actually cried when Ava gripped her finger. "She's perfect," Carol kept saying. "Absolutely perfect." My parents, they showed up on day 3, 3 days after their first grandchild was born. "Sorry we couldn't make it sooner," my mother said, barely glancing at Ava sleeping in my arms. "Caleb needed help moving into his new condo. You know how busy he is with the new promotion." They stayed for exactly 45 minutes. During that time, my father took 2 phone calls about work. My mother spent most of the visit checking her phone, and neither of them asked to hold Ava. When Ava started crying because she was hungry and needed to nurse, my mother actually looked annoyed. "Babies sure are demanding, aren't they?" she said, checking her watch. "Well, we should probably get going. We promised Caleb we'd help him unpack his kitchen tonight." After they left, I sat in the hospital bed holding my 3-day-old daughter, and I made her a promise. "You will never feel invisible," I whispered against her soft hair. "You will never have to earn my love. You will always be my priority." I thought I'd have 18 years to keep that promise. I thought I'd have a lifetime to show her what real love looked like. I had 3 months, but in those 3 months I kept my word. Every day Ava knew she was loved. Every day she was my world. Every day she was the most important thing in my life. My parents visited exactly once more during those 3 months. They stayed for 20 minutes, took one awkward photo with Ava, and left early because they had dinner reservations to celebrate Caleb's latest client acquisition. I remember watching them leave that day, and for the first time I felt genuinely sorry for them, because they were missing out on knowing this incredible little person. They were choosing conference calls and business dinners over watching their granddaughter discover her own hands, over hearing her first laugh, over seeing her smile light up a room. But mostly, I felt grateful. Grateful that Ava would grow up knowing the difference between real love and conditional attention. Grateful that she'd have grandparents who actually cared about her. Carol and Mike, who visited every weekend and treated every milestone like a celebration. I never imagined that gratitude would turn into the deepest rage I'd ever felt, because when Ava died, my parents didn't just miss her funeral. They chose not to come. June 23rd started like any other Tuesday. Ava had been fussy the night before, nothing unusual for a 3-month-old, but she'd finally settled down around 11 p.m. after I nursed her. I remember kissing her forehead before placing her in her crib, whispering, "Sweet dreams, baby girl," like I did every night. The nursery was perfect that night. Soft yellow walls the mobile Carol had bought gently spinning above the crib, casting dancing shadows of little elephants and stars. The night light glowed softly in the corner, just bright enough that I could see Ava's peaceful face when I checked on her. Which I did. Multiple times. I was that kind of new mom who couldn't help but peek in just to watch her breathe, just to make sure she was okay. At 2 a.m., she was sleeping soundly, her tiny chest rising and falling steadily. At 6 a.m., when I woke up to silence, complete, unusual silence, something felt wrong. Ava always woke up hungry around 5:30. She had since she was born. Her internal clock was like clockwork. But this morning, there was no crying, no fussing, no little sounds from the monitor. "Liam," I whispered, shaking him gently. "Something's wrong. Ava hasn't cried." He was instantly awake. As new parents, we'd both developed that hyper-awareness, that ability to go from deep sleep to full alert in seconds. We walked to the nursery together, my heart already starting to race. Maybe she was just sleeping deeply. Maybe she was finally sleeping through the night, like all the parenting books said she eventually would. But when I looked into the crib, I knew. She was too still, too quiet. Her little face was pale, her lips slightly blue. I reached down to touch her, and her skin was cold. "Call 911, I heard myself say, though my voice sounded like it was coming from somewhere far away. "Call 911 right now." The next hour was a blur of paramedic sirens and desperate attempts to revive her. But I knew. Deep in my soul, I knew she was already gone. Sudden infant death syndrome, they called it. SIDS, no warning, no explanation, no one to blame. Sometimes healthy babies just stop breathing in their sleep. I called my parents from the hospital. I don't even remember dialing the number. I just remember shaking so hard I could barely hold the phone. Mom, I sobbed when she answered. Ava's dead. She died in her sleep. I need you. There was a pause. A long pause. Oh, honey, she said finally, and her voice was so calm, so controlled. That's terrible. I'm sorry for your loss. Sorry for your loss. Like I was a stranger she'd met at a funeral home. Can you come? I whispered. I need you and Dad here. I don't know what to do. Of course, sweetie. We'll try to get there as soon as we can. Your father has meetings all day, but maybe this evening. Mom, I interrupted, my voice breaking. My baby is dead. Your granddaughter is dead. I need you now. Another pause. Jenna, I understand you're upset, but you need to try to stay calm. These things happen. It's tragic, but, well, you're young. You'll try again someday. You'll try again someday? Like Ava was a failed recipe. Like she was replaceable. They came to the hospital 6 hours later. 6 hours after I called them. They stayed for 20 minutes, offered their condolences, like they were signing a sympathy card, and left, because they had dinner plans. The next few days were a nightmare of funeral arrangements, paperwork, and well-meaning visitors. Carol and Mike were destroyed. They loved Ava like she was their own. They helped with everything from choosing the casket, to writing the obituary, to calling the church. My parents called once to ask about the details. The funeral is Thursday at 2 p.m., I told my mother. St. Mark's Episcopal on Elm Street. Thursday, she repeated, and I heard paper rustling. Oh, honey, that's not going to work. Thursday is Caleb's promotion party. He's been made senior partner. Can you believe it? The whole firm is coming, plus all our friends and family. We've had this planned for months. I stared at the phone, sure I'd misheard her. The funeral is for your granddaughter, I said slowly. I know, sweetie, and I'm so sorry about that. But Caleb's worked so hard for this promotion. This is his moment. We can't just cancel now. We've already sent invitations to everyone we know. Then change the party date. Jenna, be reasonable. Do you know how much we've spent on catering, the venue, the decorations? Caleb would be devastated if we canceled his celebration. I felt something break inside me. Something that had been cracking for 30 years finally snapped. Are you seriously telling me that a party is more important than burying your granddaughter? Don't be dramatic, my mother sighed. It's not just a party. It's a career milestone. This promotion puts Caleb on track to make partner before he's 35. This could change his whole life trajectory. And Ava's death doesn't change mine. Well, my mother said, and her voice took on that tone I knew so well, the one that meant she was about to say something that would cut me to the bone. It's not like she was really established yet, and she was just a baby. You only had her for 3 months. It's not the same as losing someone you've built a real relationship with. I hung up the phone. 3 hours later, my father called back. Your mother told me about the scheduling conflict, he said. Look, kiddo, we feel terrible about Ava. We really do. But this party for Caleb is important for the whole family. His success reflects well on all of us. Surely you can understand that some things are just bigger than personal grief. Personal grief. That's what he called the death of his granddaughter. We'll send flowers, he added, beautiful flowers. And we'll make it up to you after all this Caleb excitement dies down. That was Sunday. The funeral was Thursday. On Wednesday night, I got a text from my mother. Thinking of you tomorrow. Sorry we can't be there. The party preparations are just too hectic. But know that we love you. Know that we love you. 30 years of being their daughter. And I finally understood what their love actually meant. It meant I'd always come second. Even in my darkest hour, even when I was burying my child, their love had conditions, priorities, and scheduling conflicts, and my daughter's funeral didn't make the cut. Thursday, 2 p.m. St. Mark's Episcopal Church was filled with people who had known Ava for exactly 3 months, but who loved her more than my parents ever did. The tiny white casket sat at the front of the chapel covered in pink roses, Ava's favorite color, though she'd never lived long enough to tell us that herself. I'd chosen pink because of the onesie she wore most often, the one that made her skin look so perfect and rosy. I sat in the front pew between Liam and Carol, staring at that small casket and thinking about how wrong this all was. How a casket that tiny shouldn't even exist. How I should be home giving Ava her afternoon bottle, not sitting here saying goodbye forever. The church was surprisingly full. Mrs. Henderson from next door, who had stopped by every week just to peek at Ava through the window. Tom and Sarah from down the street, who had never even held her, but always asked how she was doing. My coworkers from the hospital. People who had only seen photos, but still took the day off to be here. Tina had flown in from Seattle again. She sat directly behind me, and I could feel her presence like a shield against everything that was about to break me. But as I looked around the chapel, the empty space where my parents should have been felt like a physical wound. 2 empty seats in the front row that screamed their absence louder than any presence could have announced their arrival. Pastor Williams began the service with a reading from Psalms. His voice was gentle, practiced at comforting the grieving, but every word felt like it was coming through the water. I kept thinking about how my parents were missing this, how they were missing the stories people shared about Ava, the tears people cried for her, the love that filled this room for a baby they thought didn't matter. Carol stood to speak first. Her voice shook as she talked about the first time she held Ava, about how Ava's tiny fingers had gripped her pinky with surprising strength, about how she'd already started planning all the things they do together, teaching her to bake cookies, taking her to the zoo, reading her bedtime stories. She was only with us for 3 months, Carol said, tears streaming down her face, but she changed our lives completely. She made us grandparents. She made us understand a love we'd never felt before. And she'll be with us forever. Mike couldn't speak through his tears, but he squeezed my hand so tight I thought it might break. These people, Liam's parents, were grieving like they'd lost their own child, because to them they had. Then something happened that made everything infinitely worse. My phone buzzed with an Instagram notification. Without thinking, maybe because I was desperate for any distraction from the pain, I glanced at it. It was Caleb's story. The first image was a champagne toast. My brother grinning widely, surrounded by colleagues and friends at some upscale rooftop restaurant. The caption read, "Senior partner at 32 dreams do come true." I scrolled to the next image. My father raising his glass with a huge smile, his arm around Caleb's shoulders. The timestamp showed it was posted 20 minutes ago. 20 minutes ago, while Pastor Williams was reading scripture over my daughter's casket. The third image made my breath catch in my throat. My mother laughing at something someone had said, her face bright and animated. She was wearing the same dress she'd worn to my college graduation. The good dress, the one she saved for special occasions. The dress she couldn't be bothered to put on for her granddaughter's funeral. The caption on this one read, "Proud parents, celebrating our son's incredible achievement. So blessed? So blessed?" I stared at that photo of my mother laughing and celebrating while I sat 30 miles away, preparing to put my baby in the ground. She looked happier in that moment than I'd seen her at any point during my entire pregnancy or the 3 months of Ava's life. Tina noticed me looking at my phone and leaned forward. "Jenna," she whispered, "put it away. Don't do this to yourself right now." But I couldn't stop scrolling. There were more images, the fancy cake, the balloon arch, the catered dinner, the speeches about Caleb's bright future, while Ava's future was ending in a cemetery plot that cost more than my parents had spent on her entire existence. I turned off my phone and tried to focus on the service, but something had fundamentally shifted inside me. The sadness was still there. Overwhelming, crushing sadness that felt like it might swallow me whole. But underneath it, something else was growing. Rage. Pure, white-hot rage that they could be celebrating while I was grieving. That they could smile and laugh and toast to success while their granddaughter lay in a casket 6 feet away from where I sat. After the service, people lingered. They hugged me, shared memories, offered help with meals and household tasks. Mrs. Henderson pressed a casserole into my hands and promised to check on me every day. Tom and Sarah offered to mow our lawn for the rest of the summer, so Liam and I wouldn't have to worry about it. These neighbors, these acquaintances, these people who barely knew us were stepping up in ways my own parents couldn't. As we prepared to leave for the cemetery, Carol pulled me aside. "Honey," she said, her eyes red from crying. "I know this isn't my place, but I have to ask. Where are your parents? I haven't seen them since Ava was born." I looked at this woman who had driven 3 hours to be here, who had taken a week off work to help us plan this funeral, who was grieving my daughter like she was her own. "They had a party to attend," I said simply. Carol's face went through several emotions: confusion, disbelief, and finally pure anger. "A party," she repeated. "For my brother's promotion. They said it was more important." Carol stared at me for a long moment. Then she pulled me into a hug so fierce it took my breath away. "I'm so sorry," she whispered into my hair. "I'm so sorry they weren't here for you. But you're not alone, okay? You'll never be alone. Mike and I, we're your family now. We choose to be your family." As we drove to the cemetery, following that tiny hearse carrying my daughter's body, I realized something profound. Family isn't just about blood. It's about who shows up. It's about who chooses to be there in your darkest moments, not who's obligated to be there. And on the day I buried my daughter, my real family filled that church. My parents were just 2 empty chairs and a champagne toast on Instagram. 2 weeks after the funeral, my mother called. "Jenna, honey, we need to talk. Your father and I feel terrible about missing Ava's service. We want to make it right. Come to dinner Sunday night. Just family. We can sit down and work through this misunderstanding." Misunderstanding. That's what she called choosing a party over their granddaughter's funeral. Against Liam's advice, he thought I wasn't ready, that I was still too raw. I agreed to go. Some part of me still hoped they'd finally understand what they'd done. Some part of me was still that 13-year-old girl waiting for her parents to remember her birthday. Sunday night, we pulled into the driveway of my childhood home. The same yellow colonial where I'd spent countless evenings feeling invisible, while Caleb held court at the dinner table. Nothing had changed. The perfectly manicured lawn, the expensive cars in the driveway, the wreath on the door that my mother changed seasonally to impress the neighbors. Caleb's BMW was there too. "Of course." My mother opened the door wearing her best hostess smile, the one she reserved for company. "There's our girl," she said, pulling me into a hug that felt staged. "Come in. Come in. I made your favorite. Pot roast." It wasn't my favorite. It was Caleb's favorite. My favorite was her lasagna, but she'd stopped making that years ago because Caleb decided he didn't like ricotta cheese. The dining room table was set with the good china, the stuff that only came out for holidays and special occasions. There were flowers in the center wine glasses, already poured, soft music playing in the background. It looked like they were trying to recreate a Norman Rockwell painting of family togetherness. But the tableau was all wrong. There was no high chair where Ava should have been, no diaper bag by the door, no baby toys scattered around the living room. Just this artificial perfection that pretended the last 3 months had never happened. Caleb was already seated, scrolling through his phone with that self-satisfied smirk I remembered from childhood. He looked up when we walked in. "Hey sis, Liam, good to see you guys." No mention of Ava, no condolences, no acknowledgement that the last time we'd all been in the same city, he'd been celebrating while we buried our daughter. My father emerged from the kitchen, carrying a bottle of wine, like nothing had happened, like this was just another ordinary family dinner. "There they are," he boomed. "Come on, sit down. Your mother's outdone herself tonight." We took our seats, Liam beside me, his hand protectively on my knee. I could feel the tension radiating from him. He'd wanted to skip this dinner, had argued that my family didn't deserve another chance to hurt me. But I'd insisted. I'd needed to know if there was any hope left for us. For the first 20 minutes, we made stilted small talk. The weather, my father's golf game, my mother's book club, anything except the elephant in the room. Or rather, the absence in the room. The tiny person who should have been there, sleeping in her carrier or nursing in my arms. Then Caleb launched into what he did best, making everything about himself. So, the promotion has been incredible, he said, cutting into his pot roast. I'm handling 3 major accounts now, including the Morrison deal. My bonus this year is going to be insane. I'm thinking about upgrading to the Porsche I've been eyeing. My parents hung on every word, like he was delivering the State of the Union address. We're so proud, my mother gushed. Senior partner at 32? Most people don't reach that level until their 40s. The party was amazing too, Caleb continued. 200 people, full catering, live jazz band. Everyone said it was the event of the year. Too bad you guys missed it. Too bad we missed it, like we'd chosen to skip a fun social gathering instead of burying our child. I felt Liam's hand tighten on my knee. A warning. A reminder to stay calm. But I couldn't. We were at a funeral, I said quietly. The table went silent. Caleb paused mid-chew. My parents exchanged glances. Right. My father cleared his throat. About that, we want you to know how sorry we are for your loss, sweetheart. Truly. But you need to understand, my mother added quickly, that party for Caleb was planned months in advance. The venue was booked, the caterers were paid, invitations were sent. We couldn't just cancel everything at the last minute. You could have changed the date, Liam said, his voice carefully controlled. Oh, honey, my mother sighed. It's not that simple. The partners from Caleb's firm were coming. These are important people with busy schedules. You can't just ask them to rearrange their calendars. I stared at her. But you could ask them to rearrange their calendars for a baby's funeral. Well, that's different, she said, and her tone was getting defensive. I mean, they didn't even know Ava. She was so young. It's not like they had a relationship with her. Just like that, she'd done it again. Reduced my daughter to an inconvenience. Made her death seem less important because she hadn't lived long enough to matter to the right people. She was 3 months old, I said, my voice starting to shake. She was your granddaughter. Of course she was, sweetie, my father jumped in. And we loved her. But you have to be practical about these things. Caleb's career is just taking off. This promotion opens doors that could benefit the whole family. Sometimes you have to prioritize the living over dwelling on tragedy. Dwelling on tragedy. That's what he called grieving my daughter. Caleb, oblivious, as always kept eating. The firm is already talking about making me partner track in the next few years. This could set me up for life. That's wonderful, dear, my mother beamed. See, Jenna, this is what I mean about thinking big picture. Caleb's success lifts all of us up. I looked around the table at these people who shared my DNA but felt like complete strangers. At my brother, who couldn't stop talking about himself long enough to acknowledge his niece's death. At my parents, who were more excited about business deals than broken hearts. Was it worth it? I asked suddenly. They all looked at me. Was it worth it? I repeated louder this time. Missing your granddaughter's funeral for wine and music and networking. Was Caleb's party worth more than saying goodbye to Ava? Jenna, my mother's voice took on that warning tone I remembered from childhood. Don't be dramatic. Dramatic. I stood up so fast my chair scraped against the floor. I buried my baby alone. Your first grandchild, and you couldn't be bothered to show up because you had champagne to drink and business cards to exchange. That's not fair, my father said. We sent flowers. You sent flowers, I repeated, incredulous. You sent flowers to make up for not being there when I needed you most. Jenna, sit down, my mother hissed. You're making a scene. Good. Maybe it's time I made a scene. Maybe it's time I stopped being the quiet, understanding daughter who never asks for anything. Caleb finally looked up from his plate. What's your problem? It was just a funeral. People die every day. The words hung in the air like a slap. Liam was on his feet instantly. What did you just say? I said people die every day, Caleb repeated, annoyed. It's not like anyone could have prevented it. The baby died of natural causes. Why should I have to sacrifice my career milestone for something that was going to happen anyway? I felt something break inside me. Not crack, completely shatter. Her name was Ava, I said, my voice deadly quiet. She wasn't the baby or something. She was Ava. She was your niece. And she mattered. Of course she mattered, my mother said quickly. But honey, you have to understand. She was only here for 3 months. It's not like you had years to bond with her. You'll have other children. I'll have other children, I stared at her. Do you hear yourself? Do you hear what you're saying about your granddaughter? We're just trying to help you move forward, my father said. Dwelling on this isn't healthy. And celebrating while she was being buried was healthy. We weren't celebrating her death, my mother snapped. We were celebrating Caleb's achievement, two completely separate things. That happened on the same day. You chose champagne over your granddaughter's funeral. We chose to honor a commitment we'd already made, my father said firmly. We chose to support the family member who was achieving something positive instead of wallowing in grief. The family member who was achieving something positive, not the family member who was suffering, not the daughter who needed them. The one who was successful. I looked at each of them. My mother with her defensive scowl, my father with his stubborn jaw, my brother with his complete indifference. And I finally saw them clearly. They weren't going to apologize. They weren't going to understand. They genuinely believed they'd made the right choice. You know what? I said, grabbing my purse. You're right. This was a misunderstanding. I misunderstood who you were. I thought you were my parents. I thought you were Ava's grandparents, but you're just strangers who happen to share my last name. Jenna, don't be ridiculous, my mother called as Liam and I headed for the door. Come back here and finish your dinner. We're family. I turned around one last time. No, I said. Family shows up. Family chooses love over convenience. Family doesn't miss funerals for parties. And then I walked out of that house and out of their lives forever. The drive home from that dinner was silent, except for my sobbing. Liam kept one hand on the wheel and one hand on mine, letting me fall apart without trying to fix it. When we got home, I collapsed on our couch and cried for 3 hours straight. Not just for Ava, but for 30 years of feeling invisible in my own family. The next morning, I couldn't get out of bed. The weight of everything. Losing Ava, losing my parents, losing the illusion that I'd ever mattered to them, felt crushing. Liam called in sick to work and just held me while I stared at the ceiling. That's when Tina showed up. She'd flown back to Seattle after the funeral, but somehow she knew I needed her. She later told me that Liam had called her after the dinner disaster, worried that I was spiraling into a depression I might not come back from. Hey, love, she said, settling onto the bed beside me. Talk to me. What's going on in that head of yours? I think I'm losing my mind, I whispered. I keep thinking about everything they've done, everything they've said, and I can't tell if I'm being crazy or if they really are that awful. Tina was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that changed everything. What if we wrote it down, all of it? Every time they chose Caleb over you, every time they made you feel small, every time they put their priorities before your needs. What if we made a timeline so you can see it clearly? I looked at her like she was suggesting we climb Mount Everest. I can't. There's too much. It would take forever. Then we'll take forever, she said simply. I'm not going anywhere. So that's what we did. For the next 6 hours, Tina sat with me at my kitchen table with a yellow legal pad, and we reconstructed 30 years of neglect. We started with the big moments I'd already told you about. My 13th birthday, my college graduation, my engagement party, my baby shower, Ava's birth, Ava's funeral. But then we dug deeper. The smaller moments that had trained me to expect less, to ask for less, to be less. Like when I was 8 and broke my arm falling off my bike. My parents were at Caleb's baseball game. I sat in the emergency room with Mrs. Peterson from next door for 4 hours before they showed up. The first thing my mother said wasn't, "Are you okay?" It was, "Why didn't you wait until after Caleb's game to have an accident?" Or, "When I was 16 and got mono missing 3 weeks of school." Instead of taking care of me, my parents hired a housekeeper because they were too busy driving Caleb to SAT prep classes and college visits. I recovered alone, making my own soup, and falling further behind in school while they invested in Caleb's future. Or when I graduated medical school, something they'd claimed to be proud of, but spent the entire celebration dinner talking about Caleb's promotion at his law firm. "Do you see the pattern?" Tina asked gently, as we reached page 4 of Handwritten Memories. I did see it. For the first time in my life, I saw it clearly. I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't being oversensitive. I wasn't asking for too much. I was just asking to matter, and my parents had spent 30 years telling me I didn't. "What if they never change?" I asked Tina. "What if I send them this timeline and they still don't get it?" "Then at least you'll know you tried," she said. "But more importantly, you'll know you stood up for yourself. You'll know you said your piece." That night, I wrote the hardest letter of my life. I told them about the little girl who waited all day for someone to remember her birthday. About the teenager who recovered from mono alone. About the college student whose parents showed up late and left early. About the daughter who got engaged and had to compete with business deals for her parents' attention. I told them about Ava, how she'd been perfect and beautiful and deserving of their love, how she'd never had the chance to prove herself worthy of their attention, because she'd died before she could achieve anything they'd consider impressive. I told them how it felt to bury my daughter while they celebrated my brother, how their choice had broken something in me that could never be repaired. And then I told them I was done. "I'm not angry anymore," I wrote. "I'm just tired of fighting for crumbs of attention. Tired of pretending that conditional love is better than no love at all. Tired of hoping you'll change into the parents I needed you to be." I printed out the timeline, all 4 pages of it. I included a photo of Ava from the hospital, the one where she was looking right at the camera with those alert eyes that seemed to see everything. And I included a copy of her death certificate because I wanted them to understand that she'd been real, that her life and death had mattered even if they'd missed both. "Are you sure about this?" Liam asked as I sealed the envelope. I thought about it. Once I sent this letter, there would be no going back. No more family dinners, no more holidays together, no more pretending we were something we'd never been. "I'm sure," I said. Ava deserved grandparents who would have moved heaven and earth to be at her funeral. If they can't understand that, then they don't deserve to be part of any future children's lives either. The next morning, I drove to the post office and sent the letter certified mail. I wanted to make sure they received it. I wanted them to have to sign for it to acknowledge that they'd gotten my words, even if they chose to ignore them. As I walked back to my car, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace, not happiness. I was still grieving, still broken, still learning how to live without my daughter. But peace! The peace that comes from finally telling the truth. The peace that comes from stopping the fight for something that was never going to be given freely. I'd spent 30 years hoping my parents would love me the way I needed to be loved. It had taken losing Ava to realize that some people just aren't capable of that kind of love. And that wasn't my fault. It was theirs. But it was my choice whether to keep accepting it. 3 weeks later, I found a letter in my mailbox. My father's handwriting on the envelope, shaky, uncertain nothing, like the confident script I remembered from birthday cards when I was little. I almost threw it away without opening it. I'd said my piece made my choice, and I was learning to live with the consequences. But something made me sit down at my kitchen table and carefully tear open the envelope. The letter was 2 pages long, handwritten on his personal stationery. The same stationery he'd used for important business correspondence my entire childhood, the kind reserved for things that mattered. "Dear Jenna," it began, and then, "I'm sorry." 2 words I'd waited 30 years to hear from him. I'm sorry we weren't there when you needed us most. I'm sorry we missed Ava's funeral. I'm sorry we made you feel invisible for so many years. Reading your timeline was like looking in a mirror and seeing a stranger. Someone I don't want to be, someone I never meant to become. He wrote about how success had become his religion, how achievement had become the only language he knew how to speak, how somewhere along the way he'd confused providing for his family with actually loving them. Your mother and I, we thought we were teaching you independence. We thought you were naturally strong, that you didn't need the same level of attention Caleb seemed to require. We were wrong. You weren't strong. You were just used to being ignored, and that's on us. The letter went on to acknowledge specific moments from my timeline. My 13th birthday, my broken arm, my graduation, my engagement. Each memory accompanied by an apology, an explanation, and what felt like genuine remorse. But it was the last paragraph that broke me. I know we can't undo the damage we've done. I know we can't bring Ava back or give you the childhood you deserved. I know we might have lost the right to be part of your life. But I want you to know that your daughter mattered. She mattered because she was yours. And you matter more than any promotion or achievement or success story ever could. I'm just sorry it took losing her for me to understand that. I cried reading that letter. Not the angry, bitter tears I'd been crying for months, but something softer. Something that felt almost like relief. My father had finally seen me. It was 30 years too late, and it had cost me my daughter's funeral, but he'd finally seen me. I showed the letter to Liam that evening. "So, what are you going to do?" he asked. I thought about it for a long time. "I'm going to keep the letter," I said finally. "But I'm not going to respond. Not yet. Maybe not ever." Why? Because one apology doesn't erase 30 years of damage. And I need to know who I am when I'm not fighting for their attention. I need to learn how to exist without that constant ache of wanting them to love me properly. Liam nodded. He understood that some wounds need time to heal even after the bleeding stops. But something else was happening during this time. Something that surprised me. I started getting emails from other mothers who had lost children. Word had somehow spread about Ava's story. Maybe through mutual friends, maybe through the church. I never found out exactly how. But these women started reaching out, sharing their own stories of loss and the complicated grief that comes with it. Many of them talked about feeling isolated, about people not knowing what to say about family members who tried to fix their grief with platitudes and timelines, about feeling like their children were being forgotten by everyone except them. That's when Tina came to me with an idea. "What if we started something?" she said during one of our weekly coffee dates. "What if we created a support group for parents who've lost children? Not just a grief counseling thing, but something bigger. Something that honors the children we've lost while helping the parents who are still here." The idea took root slowly, but it grew into something beautiful. We called it Ava's Light, a foundation that provides support to families dealing with infant loss. We organize memorial services for babies whose funerals were sparsely attended. We provide meals and practical support during those first devastating weeks. We create memory boxes and photo sessions for families who need help preserving their child's legacy. But most importantly, we just show up. We show up the way my parents didn't. We show up the way families should. 6 months after Ava's death, we held our first memorial garden ceremony. 23 families came to plant flowers in memory of their children. We read each baby's name aloud, shared stories, and promised that none of these little ones would be forgotten. As I stood in that garden surrounded by parents who understood my pain, I realized something profound. Ava's death had broken me, but it had also revealed who I really was underneath all that seeking for approval. I was someone who could transform tragedy into purpose, someone who could take the worst thing that had ever happened to me and use it to help others. I was someone who could love, fiercely grieve honestly, and heal purposefully. The little girl who'd been ignored at her own birthday party had grown into a woman who makes sure no child is forgotten, no parent grieves alone. My parents' letter sits in my desk drawer now. I read it sometimes, and I feel not forgiveness exactly, but something softer than anger. They're trying to understand what they did wrong. They're learning slowly how to love better. But I'm learning too. I'm learning that some relationships can't be fixed, only grieved. I'm learning that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about who shows up when everything falls apart. And I'm learning that the love I have to give doesn't have to be earned or deserved or scheduled around more important things. It just has to be given, so I give it to the families who come to our support groups. I give it to the mothers who email me at 3 a.m. because they can't sleep. I give it to the memory of my daughter who taught me in 3 short months what unconditional love actually looks like. And someday, maybe I'll give it to my parents again. But not because they've earned it or because family obligation demands it. Because I'll choose to, just like they should have chosen me, just like they should have chosen Iva. But for now, I'm choosing myself. I'm choosing healing. I'm choosing to build something beautiful from something broken. I'm choosing to live a life that would make my daughter proud. A life where love isn't conditional, where showing up matters more than success, and where no one has to earn their place at the table. That's Ava's real legacy. Not the tragedy of her death, but the love that her brief life created and continues to spread. And that love will outlast any promotion, any achievement, any celebration that my parents thought was more important than saying goodbye to their granddaughter. Because love like that doesn't have an expiration date. It just keeps growing. What would you have done in Jenna's situation? Would you have forgiven parents who chose a party over your child's funeral? Or would you have walked away like she did? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and your stories often inspire future videos. If this story touched you, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. These real-life stories matter, and your support helps me share more of them. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.